4 board members of 5.
Right. I'd like to call the meeting to order at 5:03 p.m. We will start with the Pledge of Allegiance and the Goethe School Pledge. So let's do the pledge first. Please stand. Place your right hand over your heart. Ready, begin. Pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America.
United States of America.
To the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Casey and Biggie for the pledge.
As a citizen of the world, I will follow Goethe's circle of learning. Curiosity opens my mind, ideas lead to knowledge, responsible choices show respect, cooperation strengthens others, learners are courageous, empathy creates community.
Als ein Bürger dieser Welt folge ich dem Kreis des Lernens, neugierig, ideenreich, respektvoll, kooperativ, mutig, empathisch.
Perfect, thank you. Let's start with roll call. Frank?
I am here, but clumsy with my buttons.
Sam?
Here.
Pete will not be joining us today. Katrin?
I'm here.
Right, moving on, I'd like to make a motion for the affirmation of board findings pursuant to Government Code Section 54953E. Try saying that fast. Is there a second?
Second.
That was from Sam, I believe. All in favor? Frank?
Aye.
Sam?
Aye.
Katrin?
Yes.
Right. I would like to make a motion to approve the agenda as presented. Do I have a second?
I second. Katrin.
That's Katrin. All in
Yes.
favor? Frank?
Yes.
Sam?
Yes.
And Katrin?
Yes.
Was a yes for me as well. Moving on to the Brown Act training. Jerry, welcome to our virtual group. We're excited to have you here.
Thank you. It's good to be here.
Wayne doesn't do this anymore. He's parlayed that over to you.
So I used to do all of these trainings, and then when he came aboard, I was fortunate to have him to help me with doing a bunch of these trainings for many years. And but he has gone to work as general counsel of a water district down in Southern California. So he is no longer with us, and so they have come back to me again. So that is the nature of it, I guess. But we're going to miss him tremendously. But anyway, it's my pleasure to be with you tonight, though. And I'm just going to share my screen so you can see the presentation.
So while Jerry gets situated, I'd just like to open this up. This is a discussion. I've seen this presentation. I think Frank and we've seen this numerous times. I would just like, if it's all right with you, Jerry, if our membership has questions, is it all right if they just pause you and ask? Is that all right?
Absolutely.
Okay, great. So feel free, guys, to hammer away at Jerry and Frank or I if we have something to contribute. I doubt that we will. But Jerry, the floor is yours.
All right, wonderful. Well, I hope even though some of you have been over several years to these trainings, there should be some new stuff here for you, at least with regard to the recent legislation that was passed. So hopefully there'll be at least a little something for every board member. Tonight we're going to cover the state's open meeting law, which is commonly referred to as the Brown Act. So if you hear people talking about the Brown Act, they're talking about the open meeting law. And the open meeting law applies to all local government agencies. That includes charter schools, but also includes school districts, county boards of education, city councils, boards of supervisors, all of those types of entities are covered. And that became true for charter schools effective on January 1st, 2020 was when we had final legislative action on this. It had been a matter of some debate whether charter schools were covered, but that was resolved in the affirmative by Governor Newsom when he signed SB 126, which made chartered schools expressly subject to the open meeting law, as well as some other government transparency laws that relate to conflicts of interest and public records. One of the special things that also occurred as part of that law is that charter schools were given a specific set of boundaries within which they can hold their board meetings. And in your case, that is the boundaries of Los Angeles County. There are different boundaries set depending on how many charter schools you operate and whether they're within one county or more than one county. But in your case, it is just the boundaries of Los Angeles County. So that is a relatively new statute. As I said, it went into effect just in 2020. And then shortly thereafter, as you know, the pandemic happened, and then everyone sort of converted to virtual meetings almost immediately. So we have been operating through a virtual meeting structure for most of the time that this law has been in effect. So the purpose of the Brown Act is to ensure essentially that democracy works well here in California with regard to local government agencies. The idea here is that the people, in order to retain control over their local government agencies that serve them and that spend their tax money, that they've got to know what you're talking about. They've got to know how you're spending their money. They've got to understand what policies you're adopting that govern your school. And that only if they have all that information and knowledge and have the ability to participate in certain limited ways in your meetings, can they hopefully retain some control over the local government agencies that serve them. So really, it's just about transparency. The public doesn't have a right to make decisions on behalf of the school. They simply have the ability to give you input. The decisions are yours as a board to make on behalf of the school. So all of the different rules that we're going to talk about tonight that deal with posting of agendas and all the different procedures during meetings, all of those things apply anytime a majority of the members of the board meet to hear, discuss, deliberate, or take action on any item of charter school business. So in other words, if it relates in any way to the charter school and a majority of you are going to talk about it, there needs to be an agenda posted for that meeting, okay? And that agenda, as we're going to talk about more in a few minutes, needs to include a list of agenda items that you intend to talk about when you gather. Note here that the hear, discuss, deliberate, or take action is the key phrase. So one of the most common Brown Act violations is that clients will call and say, you know, Jerry, we didn't take any action at that meeting. We just gathered and we talked about it a little bit, but we didn't take action. And what I have to remind them is, unfortunately, it's not just when you gather to take action, even just if a majority of you gather to hear about an item related to charter school business or to discuss it. Either of those will trigger your need to have posted an agenda so that members of the public can join you and listen in. So be careful anytime a majority of you are going to talk about charter school business. It's fine, you just need to post an agenda. And all these same rules that we're going to talk about today nearly always will apply to committees of the board of directors. There is one very, very narrow exception when you have a committee that meets all 4 of these criteria. It's not required to post an agenda. The other 99% of committees that you have are going to post an agenda every time they meet, just like members of the board. Sam, I see you have your hand up.
Thanks, Jerry. For the agendas, is there a required time frame in advance of the meeting that they're posted publicly, or is there guidance on how far in advance that should be?
There is, in fact. So we're going to talk about that in a couple of slides, but I'll just address it now, and then we'll skip it when we come to it. For regularly scheduled meetings, those are done 72 hours in advance. Weekends count. holidays count. So it's just a 72-hour rule, regardless of whether you might happen to have a weekend or holiday in between, or as part of that 72 hours. That's still fine. That still counts for your total 72 hours. If it's a special meeting, 24 hours notice is required in advance of the meeting. And then there is one very rare circumstance where you could have what's known as an emergency meeting with less than 24 hours notice. And that applies whenever there is a crippling natural disaster or there's work stoppage, meaning a strike, okay? So if you have a worker strike or you have a crippling natural disaster, then you might be able to call an emergency meeting of the board as opposed to a special meeting. But just be careful that, that the definition is very narrow around emergency meetings. And so unless it fits within that very narrow definition, you'll need to call a special meeting of the board with 24 hours notice, okay? So as I was saying, all of these agenda rules apply to board committees as well, generally. This one exception, if a committee is advisory, meaning it makes no decisions on behalf of the charter school, and if it is composed only of board members, no parents, no staff members, no community members, no experts from the community, none of those kinds of folks sitting on the committee, just board members, and it's less than a majority of the board, okay? And it is not a standing committee. Standing committees are things like your budget committee or a personnel committee or an audit committee, a group that meets and has some specific subject matter that they are assigned to address or to monitor in some way. Only if you meet all 4 of those criteria can a committee avoid the need to post an agenda and otherwise follow all the Brown Act rules. So typically you're going to fail one of these 4 criteria and end up needing to post an agenda for that committee. But in the event you can meet all 4, then yes, that committee will meet the exception and will not need to post agendas. The theory here is that, and if you can meet all of 4 of these exceptions, what that means is that the full board will be hearing a recommendation from this committee. And of course, members of the public can participate at the full board meeting to hear the recommendation and provide their input then. So it's not that the public never has input, it's just that they will give that input at the full board meeting as opposed to at the committee level, in the case that a committee meets all 4 of these exceptions.
Can I ask? This seems like not very logical to me. I'm just reading so in advisory committee, less than a quorum of the board, and not a standing committee composed of only board members. That's the stuff which I think is interesting. Like what's if like the meeting? There's all kinds of other meetings where board members and non-board members are present, and so is that these are not then. This can't be true if it's composed not only of board members. Like what this?
So if you
logical sense,
if you have a
If it's a board committee,
if you have a board committee and it is composed of board members and non-board members,
right?
Then it's fine. You just need to post agendas and follow the Brown Act for that committee. Now there's two issues that you may be thinking about here. One issue may be that an administrator decides to meet with a group of people that might happen to include board members and non-board members.
such as
That's
the
not
task
an
force.
advisory committee to the board. Go ahead, Frank.
I was just, it was me, I was
Oh,
interjecting. That would be
sorry.
an example of the strategic planning committee or task force that I run.
And it's advisory to you, not to the board.
Yes.
Okay. So, so if it is advisory to you and you are the decision maker, not the board, in other words, if you have the power to make all those decisions that might come to you as advice, as opposed to you, then turning around and taking all those recommendations to the board, which makes it a little bit more of a gray area if those things are ultimately going to the full board, because then it makes it seem like it's really an advisory committee to the board, even if staff is chairing it. So just be careful and thoughtful about, making sure that things that come before a group convened by the administration is decisions that the administration's been delegated authority to make on behalf of the school. And then, yes, those types of committees will be an entirely different kind of an exception because they're not an advisory committee to the board in the first instance. Okay. The other thing that sometimes happens is that sometimes you just get members of the board who meet with parents on an ad hoc basis. Like maybe, for example, you run into some parents in the parking lot during school drop-off or school pickup. The mere fact that one or two board members have a conversation with parents does not make you an advisory committee, right? You're just having a conversation with a parent. And that also does not trigger the need for you to post agendas because you're not a committee in the first instance, right? So a couple of other things that I want to address here related to serial meetings, okay? So serial meetings are times when you might have a majority of the members of the board engaging in a series of communications. And these can occur through phone conversations, in-person meetings, emails, text messages, any of those kinds of ways that you might communicate with another person. And where those communications are happening outside of a properly agendized board meeting, they can occur through direct communications, which would be a phone call or an email or a text message, or they can, occur through intermediaries. That would be where you would sort of designate someone to go talk to other board members on your behalf, right? That's an intermediary. Where there's some discussion or deliberation or action taken on an item of school business. That sort of a meeting is prohibited because the underlying purpose of the Brown Act is to ensure that the public is able to be part of the entirety of your decision-making process, from the earliest discussions all the way through the vote on the final agenda item, okay? So for that reason, if serial meetings were not prohibited, that would be an easy way to do an end run around the Brown Act requirements, right? So the legislature has prohibited serial meetings from taking place. And really all this means is you need to post an agenda and have a meeting where members of the public can be present, can witness the discussion and the vote, that's all. Now, these serial meetings can occur, as I said, through a number of different methods. But one of the most common issues that we see coming up right now is in the context of website postings. So a lot of charter schools may have a Facebook page or some other social media presence. And recently, as no doubt you all are aware, we've had a fair amount of controversy around certain issues related to COVID, and that have included things like school closures first, and then, should we reopen schools, and independent study policies relating to this, and all of this. And so sometimes what we're seeing with some clients is that parents are beginning to post things on the school's Facebook page, like they'll post a comment that they're frustrated with something or they're upset with something. If you see something like that, just be cautious to count the number of board members who may have posted a reply, and make sure that you're not going to be in a circumstance where a majority of you post a reply to some parent comment on social media or something. Okay. So then I have here this hub and chain, just to illustrate a couple of different ways this can happen. The picture here shows, board member 1 calling board member 2, and 2 calling 3, and 3 calling 4, and so on. That is a chain. So that's a serial meeting occurring via chain. And board member 6 may not even know that board member 1 called board member 2. All board member 6 knows is that she got a call from board member 5 about this topic, right? So Be cautious as you talk to other board members, particularly when you have a small board. It's very easy to get to that majority number very quickly. And sometimes without you even realizing that that has occurred. There's also a hub concept, which I don't have a picture of here, but that would be where board member one just directly calls all of the other members of the board, more like the center of a wheel where they would be calling out to each member of the board. Both of those types of chains or direct communications are prohibited if they involve a majority of the members of the board outside of the board meeting and where you're talking about or taking action on school business. There's one special rule that deals with staff and their communications with members of the board. So I always like to go over this because there's a lot of misunderstanding sometimes about this rule. And really what the rule is just that there may be an item on the agenda, and let's just say, I'm going to pick an example, like the school budget, for example, because board members also often have questions about the school budget. You know, what does this mean? Why is the money going up here and down here? You know, why does revenue seem so much higher this year than it was last year? Help me to understand, you know, and you might reach out to staff in advance to ask those questions. And that is perfectly appropriate if you want to reach out and ask questions like that in advance of a meeting to better understand what you're going to be asked to vote on at an upcoming meeting. And staff can absolutely answer your questions. In fact, even if all of the board members called and had the exact same question, Chris could answer that same question for each of you separately. No problem with that. The only thing that Chris can't do is Chris can't communicate to you as a member of the board the comments or position of any other member of the board. So for example, if Sam were to call and say, you know, why is, you know, revenue so much higher last year than this year? I need to try to wrap my head around why is that the case? Seems like a big change. Chris can answer Sam's question. All that Chris can't do is say, you know, in fact, I just hung up with Frank, and I know Frank had the same question, and he has a very specific, you know, way that he'd like to address that revenue issue, and let me share it with you, and then go on to share Frank's position on the issue. Okay, that he cannot do. So he can absolutely answer the questions of every single member of the board. He just can't share the comments or position of any other members of the board. Where should that conversation take place? Obviously at the board meeting, right? Where you've got an agenda posted, the school budget is on the agenda, and absolutely that conversation between board members about how each of you feel about the school budget, that should occur in an open session meeting of the board where members of the public can hear your discussion and can participate in certain limited ways that we'll talk about in a minute. Now, teleconference meetings. This is an area where this next two slides are going to look very familiar to your board members who have been on the board a while because they've been in the Brown Act a long, long time. They remain in the Brown Act even after the most recent legislation. So this is sort of your default, and I call it sort of the normal rules for doing a teleconference, right? And then after these next two slides, I'm going to talk about Assembly Bill 361, which was just recently signed by the governor and which allows teleconferences under a different set of rules than these 6 rules if there is a state of emergency in place. And right now, obviously, we do have a state of emergency that's been declared by the governor due to COVID. And you may be able to meet the criteria necessary for you to do a teleconference under Assembly Bill 361. So I'm going to talk about that in a minute. But these rules apply. They're sort of the default rules where if for some reason you can't meet all the criteria to have an emergency meeting, you can still have a teleconference. You just have to meet these 6 rules to do so. Okay. So the 6 additional requirements over a normal meeting that you would have in person is that the agenda must be posted at all teleconference locations. So if one of you was gonna, just as an example, be at a business meeting in Kansas City, and you were gonna be staying at the Kansas City Hilton Hotel, the agenda would have to be posted there. And it would have to be posted the entire posting period in advance. So for a regular meeting, that would be 72 hours, as we discussed, or for a special meeting would be 24 hours in advance, okay? If it wasn't posted there, you would not be able to participate in the meeting from Kansas City because you would have failed to meet one of the requirements to have this teleconference meeting. The next one is that each teleconference location must be identified in the notice and agenda of the meeting. So if you're going to call in from room 301 of the Hilton in Kansas City, that would have to be put on the agenda as an additional meeting location. And members of the public would have the right, if they happen to be in Kansas City that day, to drop by and join the meeting from your hotel room. Obviously, I've never had that happen in practice, but it could happen. And you're required to make that disclosure, so they could if they wish to. Yes, question.
Yes, thank you. Hi, Jerry. This is really a peculiar set of rules, specifically about the teleconference, just provided the reality that we live in these days. So we go back to the old rules and we, as a board, decide that we want to continue meeting virtually. Do we need to also post our addresses of our private residences when we post the agenda? So Catherine is calling in from West 59th Place.
So if you're doing it under the traditional teleconference rules, yes, you would need to post the address where you're going to call in from. So if you're going to call in from your personal residence, then your personal residence address would be listed on the agenda, and members of the public would be able to see your address. And if they wanted to, they could participate in the meeting also from your home address. And I did have that happen once. I tell the story, and Wayne may have shared the story with you, that happened to me once, that we had a meeting and there was a controversial item that was on the board agenda. And I don't think, frankly, that most of the board members thought it was controversial at the time it was put on the agenda, but it became controversial. And by the time of the meeting night, a number of parents had decided they were upset about this item, and they decided they would go to a board member's house that was listed on the agenda because that was closer to where they lived than where the school was. And it was going to take them another probably 25 minutes of driving to get to the school location versus going to this board member's house. And so they decided to show up there and participate in the meeting from this board member's living room, which, you know, was not exactly an ideal circumstance. So you do need to think about if at some point you go back to the traditional teleconference rules and you're not able to do one of the utilize the emergency rules any longer, which I'm going to come to in just a minute, what those rules are. But if you're going to end up going back to this, that is something to consider is, do you feel comfortable having your personal address out there for members of the public to see? And do you feel comfortable that members of the public might show up and knock on your door and want to participate in the meeting from your living room? In practice, even though I tell that story and it was really a difficult situation when that happened, in practice, I mean, I've been working with charter schools here in California almost 20 years now, and it's extremely rare that a member of the public has ever shown up at a charter school board member's house and wanted to participate from there. I mean, I'm not going to say it never happens, but it's very rare that I've seen it happen in practice. So, but you know, that's up to you and your level of personal comfort having your address out there and whatnot. I see another question here.
Yeah, in the very beginning, you said something about the Los Angeles County rule where board members have to be in order to participate in a board meeting, right? And what's the rule here? If you're in a teleconference and you're in Kansas City, you can participate. Can you vote? Can you not vote? What's the rule?
That's a great question. So let me click to the next slide, which will partially address that question. And then I'm going to go into it in a little more detail to make sure I fully answer your question. So rule 6 here, under the teleconference rules, is that a quorum, meaning a majority of the board, must participate from within the charter school's jurisdiction. And again, jurisdiction for your purposes has been defined as LA County, okay? So if you have a 5-member board, let's just say, and 3 of your members are within LA County, that is good enough. And the remaining 2 members can participate literally from anywhere in the globe. It does not matter where the remaining 2 board members are, as long as a majority are in LA County. So the only time in practice that I've seen that really turn into an issue is sometimes when schools are trying to call a meeting right at the holidays, and you might have multiple board members traveling out of state for, to see family or things like that. But outside of, doing something like right at a holiday, usually a majority of the board is going to be present within the same county, and that usually proves not to be a big deal. Now, yes, members who are outside of the charter school's jurisdiction, assuming you've met the teleconference rules here, they do have the right to participate in the discussion, and they do have a right to vote, and their votes will be counted. Even if they're calling from Kansas City or China or wherever they're calling from, it doesn't matter. Their votes will matter just the same as your vote cast here in LA. So no problem with that at all. Okay. Well, let's look quickly at 3, 4, and 5 here, and then I'm going to move on to the Assembly Bill 361, because that really is probably how you're going to be conducting your meetings, I'm guessing, for at least a while longer. But let's just go over these traditional rules to make sure you know what they are. All votes have to be taken by roll call. Okay, and so just as tonight, the board chair called each of your names one by one. That's what roll call means. And that happened at your meeting tonight as you were taking a couple of votes before we got to this item. So that was great. That's all that means. And each teleconference location must be accessible to the public. This one is sometimes problematic if you are in an older office building or you're in a home with stairs at the front, something like that. You have to keep in mind somebody in a wheelchair has to be able to get into your office or into your home if you're going to be calling in from there. So just be thoughtful about that. And if there's a problem with that, then we're going to need you to participate from some other location where someone in a wheelchair can access the area where you're calling in from. So just keep that in mind. And then this last one is really no big deal at all. Number 5, that members of the public must be able to hear and have the right to address the board directly from each teleconference location. Obviously, since now all of us have speakerphones on our cell phones, you just click the speakerphone option. That really is not a big deal. That used to be a much bigger deal 15 years ago when, we didn't have the modern technology we have now. But these days, that one is no big deal at all. So those are your 6 normal traditional teleconference rules. Yeah, question.
Do you have a sense whether the older laws regarding teleconferencing are going to be overhauled once we exit this state of emergency? Because I imagine that a majority of boards will continue to want to meet virtually. And this just seems quite outdated these days. Also, I mean, with the ADA compliance, et cetera, I feel like everybody can just join a Zoom meeting much easier than to drive to a location.
So it's a great question. And I would say I kind of expected that when the legislature took up Assembly Bill 361, I was kind of thinking and hoping, honestly, that we might get a permanent fix that might just rewrite and override these teleconference rules altogether. But that didn't happen. And I'll tell you that I think one of the reasons that didn't happen is because California is a mighty big place. And we do have many parts of the state that still have very limited or even sometimes no reliable internet access. And we also have many families in California. And boy, you know, I learned how real this was when we went into the pandemic phase, how many families we have who do not have a home computer or any internet access at their home whatsoever. They simply, it's just beyond their financial means to afford it. And so for those families, the in-person meetings are really preferable because they can come to the school site, which is near their house often, and be able to participate actively, even if they don't have a computer at home or internet access at home. So I think those are going to be issues that still are going to be in legislators' minds, even coming out of the pandemic. How do we ensure participation for low-income families in all local government agency decisions that impact them? And so while I think they might reconsider a couple of these rules, I think the question is, will they really overhaul them completely? I'm guessing maybe not, because of some of those concerns, you know. In other words, we may not get to a place where just everyone goes to full virtual meetings always for that reason. So we'll see. It'll be interesting to see how that progresses. But moving on now to AB 361. So you know that for the last, well, since the pandemic began, the governor issued an executive order that temporarily waived some of those 6 rules that we just talked about and allowed people to have meetings virtually through the pandemic due to the risk of not wanting to have large numbers of people gathering in one place. And that executive order expired at the end of last month and has now been replaced with this language from Assembly Bill 361. It largely continues the policy of the governor, but it does have certain special findings that are required and has a few more provisions that you need to meet in order to continue to meet virtually, a few more than were in the governor's original executive order. I'm just going to walk you through these, okay? So you can continue to have these virtual teleconference meetings without adhering to some of these rules if you can meet certain conditions, okay? Well, some of those flexibilities that you get is that you don't need to provide notice of each teleconference location or post it at each teleconference location. So that is a continuation of the executive order rule, gives you a little flexibility during the emergency. Also, a quorum of the board do not need to be within the charter school's jurisdiction, meaning LA County. Okay, so if you're meeting under the emergency rules. And governing board members may participate in teleconference meeting from places that are not publicly accessible, again, during the emergency rules only. So you see how these are very different. They're the opposite of the rules teleconference meeting, okay? Now, you may continue to have those virtual meetings pursuant to the state of emergency as long as there is, in fact, a proclaimed state of emergency by the governor, which there is currently for COVID. That is true. That first bullet is true. And one or the other of the next 2. Either state or local officials have imposed or recommended measures to promote social distancing, or the charter school board determines that meeting in person would present imminent risks to the health or safety of attendees. So what I can tell you is that most of our clients are, in fact, continuing to meet virtually. And I can tell you that they are finding, as you did at the beginning of this meeting, that number 1 applies, that there is a state of emergency, and number 3 applies, that meeting in person would present imminent risk to health or safety of attendees. So those are the findings that our boards, our clients' boards are making. I have one client that I'm aware of who has returned to in-person meetings. And they've made that determination based on their local conditions. But you know, the vast majority of charter schools are continuing to meet virtually, at least for now. And one of the things that you're going to have to do every 30 days is assess whether these things remain true. You know, is there still a state of emergency? And is it still true that meeting in person would present imminent risk to health and safety of attendees? Okay. If either of those two things stops being true, you will go revert back to the normal teleconference rules, because you won't be able to qualify to continue to use the emergency rules if these things are not true. Yeah, I mentioned there was a few special things that you needed to do in order to take advantage of doing your meetings virtually. You have to continue to respect the legal, meaning statutory, meaning things written in statute, and constitutional rights of parties and public appearing before the board. You have to give notice and post agendas as otherwise required under the Brown Act. So that means you're going to post an agenda on your website, and you're going to post one within your jurisdiction somewhere. You're going to allow members of the public to access the meeting via Zoom or whatever platform you use. And you're going to describe the manner in which the public can offer public comment. So if we had members of the public here who wishing to speak, you would have to describe to them, here's when you can speak, here's how you can speak, you know, raise your hand, use the raise your hand feature, you know, whatever. However you would like them to do that to be recognized. You may not require members of the public to submit comments in advance of the meeting. The public now must be able to participate in real time at your meetings, just as they could if you were meeting in person. There needs to be a reasonable period or a timed period for public comment. That's your choice. And if there's a technical disruption in the meeting broadcast, you can take no further action on items in the agenda until public access is restored. So meeting broadcast means if, for example, you had a camera set up at the and there was a presentation going on to be broadcast, and you know members of the public could not see it, then you're going to have to suspend the business until that public access is restored. Now that's to be distinguished from, I want to be clear, that's to be distinguished from a random member of the public who has a computer problem. And as a result, they can't see anybody's presentation about anything. Okay, well, that's on them, right? We're talking here about a problem with your broadcast of the meeting, not with an individual person in the public having an issue with their, okay?
Jerry, I'm just gonna do a quick time check. We're at 5:45.
Yep, I think we're making, I think we can get through the rest, and I'm gonna say 5 to 7 minutes, something like that. Does that work?
Perfect.
Great. As I mentioned, you're going to need to, every 30 days, consider whether the state of emergency is still in effect, and whether one of the circumstances that allows you to continue to do virtual meetings is still in effect. And so that's why at every board meeting that you have from here forward, there will be that motion on the agenda that you took action on right after roll call, that reconsideration of whether the state of emergency exists and whether these criteria are in fact in place. Okay, and so you'll be doing that at the front of every board meeting from here on out. I'm sorry, that's just what the statute says you have to do in order to do the virtual meetings. So.
Our agenda didn't have a motion and a second thing. Should it carry, like usually we have like in our, where we take action? I think on our agenda, oh, I'm sorry, affirmation, it does have a motion. I misspoke, I apologize. Disregard.
Okay. Next one is notice and agendas. So as we've discussed, you need to have an agenda, has to be posted properly. The main thing is you're going to need to have a brief description of the items to be transacted or discussed. And you do have that on your agenda, so I was happy to see that. And with very few exceptions, if an item is not on the agenda, the board cannot discuss it at that meeting. So what you'll have to do if you come across something where you realize during a board meeting, gosh, we really need to talk about fill in the blank, the right thing to do is to agendize that or ask that that be placed on the agenda for a future meeting of the board. Don't just start talking about it when it's not on the agenda. Okay, make sure you just put that on a future board meeting agenda. Nothing wrong with asking to have something on a future board meeting agenda. That's great. So that brief description is usually not more than 20 words. And our best practice advice is that you also have some place on your agenda where you note how someone can request a disability related accommodation if they need one. And where they can go to inspect documents that are distributed to the board as part of the board packet. It's commonly referred to, the backup materials to the open session portion of the board. We've already covered the number of hours in advance. We talked about that earlier in response to one of the questions. Okay. So let's talk for a couple minutes about rights of the public at your meetings. They have the right to give oral testimony at a meeting, and that's on either items that are on the agenda, or they have the right to speak to you about things that are not on the agenda, but are of concern to them as members of the public. So even though you can't add items to the agenda, members of the public can show up and say, I have a concern about fill in the blank, and I'm going to talk to you about it. You have the right, though, to set reasonable time limits on members of the public coming, because you have important business to transact at all of your board meetings, and we want to make sure you get through that business. Okay, so have some time limits and make sure they are enforced, regardless of whether you agree or you disagree with what the person is telling you. Make sure it's consistent and fair. In terms of addressing disruptive speakers, if someone is so disruptive that they are unmuting themselves and talking over you as board members, not letting you speak about items that are on the agenda, certainly you have the ability to mute them, and you have the ability to prevent them from disrupting your meeting once their time limit has been reached. Members of the public also have the right to audio record and broadcast from your meetings. I would say this happens relatively rarely, but it does happen on occasion that a TV station might show up to address some or get a sense of some particularly controversial item. Again, rare in a charter school context. You may have no limitations on public attendance at your meetings. So you cannot require someone to give their name or give their address or show their driver's license or prove they're an American citizen or anything like that as a condition of coming to your meetings. Any member of the public has the right to attend your meetings, period. Nothing more is required, just to attend your meeting. Okay, if they want to speak, you can provide some process, the raise your hand feature, or maybe they put a note in the chat box, something like that. Just to let the chair know that they're interested in speaking on that item. We've talked about these remaining two, that making sure your facilities are accessible to people with disabilities and letting people know where it is they can get your agendas and agenda packets. Almost all your meetings are going to be held in open session where members of the public can see and hear the entirety of the discussion and the vote on an item. However, there are a handful of reasons why charter schools can meet in a closed session and exclude members of the public. So for you, this is when you're going to talk about pending or anticipated litigation with legal counsel, where you're going to consider some sort of a personnel action. And that would be appointment, employment, evaluation, discipline, dismissal, release of an employee, any of those. Would be closed session items. Okay. If you're going to meet with your real estate negotiator to talk about the purchase or lease of real property, if you're going to meet with your labor negotiator to talk about negotiations with employees, if you're going to deal with pupil discipline, where the board itself is going to take some sort of action or consider taking an action to suspend or expel a pupil. And this last one here, public security, allows various law enforcement agencies to meet with you in closed session to discuss potential threats to public facilities that you may operate. Anytime you're going to have a closed session and your staff stays on top of this on your behalf, really, but you use the safe harbor agenda language. For every one of those closed session items, there's specific language that you're expected to have on your agenda, and it's contained in the government code section there that I referenced. And then the board makes an announcement of the reasons for the closed session prior to going into closed session. Public has to have an opportunity to comment on those closed session items. And then you make a report of any action taken in closed session, as well as the vote or abstention of every board member following the closed session, okay? Only necessary personnel may attend. So what I mean by this is your realtor should not be sitting in on the pupil discipline discussion because he or she has nothing to do with whether you're going to expel that kid. And the kid and the parents who are there on a pupil discipline matter should not be sitting through your real estate discussion because they have nothing to add to that conversation. So people should be invited into closed session in segments as you address each item one by one. One other thing that's vital for you to know is that confidentiality is required. Anything you learn in closed session and any documents you receive there are strictly confidential, and only members of the board are privy to that information. You may not discuss it with the media, you may not discuss it with your spouse, you may not discuss it with staff of the school, except if it's in the limited capacity of carrying out what the board is instructed occur in that closed session. A couple of other random things. We're getting here to the end, the last couple of slides here. Executive compensation. If you're going to approve any sort of change to your executive director's compensation, that has to happen at a regular meeting of the board. And prior to any final action, the board must give a report verbally of what that final action is going to be during the open session of the meeting where that final action will be taken. The idea here just being that there was a city down in Southern California that had granted exorbitant compensation to staff, and the legislature thought that forcing a local agency board to publicly disclose this information would essentially prevent people from receiving compensation that was outside of industry norms for their positions. So, okay, last item is just what happens if you don't follow all these rules. Violations of the Brown Act, if they are intentional, and I want to underscore the word intentional, they are intentional, they can be misdemeanors in the state of California, and you can be prosecuted. In most cases, what I find with our clients is that they are not intentionally violating the Brown Act. If anything, they make a mistake innocently, and somebody points it out after the fact. And if that happens, don't worry, right? Because the answer almost always is that we'll simply call another meeting of the board, we'll put it on the agenda, we'll make sure the agenda is properly posted, and you'll discuss and vote again. So usually not a terrible consequence for any accidental violation of the Brown Act. Okay, if you get a notice of concern from your charter authorizer, or if you get a notice and demand for cure or a cease and desist letter, please do let us know right away though, because you have a very short period of time to respond to these. And if you don't take action to respond within the period of time governed by the statute, the party then has the right to file a lawsuit against the school to seek injunctive relief. And if they prevail, they'll be entitled to have their attorney's fees paid by the school in addition to you paying your own attorney's fees. So we would always much rather, if you get a notice like this, fix it right away and make the whole issue go away rather than get dragged into a litigation fight over it. Sam, I see you have a question.
Thanks, Jerry. So for inadvertent acts that, go against the Brown Act. So is that act of the board then not effective? Is that just kind of taken off the books, right? As a imperfect act, and so that's why we have to retake it in the proper fashion, or is it still considered an act of the board?
So it's an act of the board unless someone challenges it. So what they need to do is they'd send you one of these notices, right? And which is why I say if you get one, call right away so we can fix it. But what would happen is if you had a defective act because it wasn't on the agenda, just as an example, you took action to approve a contract that wasn't on the agenda, and a member of the public challenged you on it. And if then, let's say, in response to receiving their letter, you said, go pound sand, we're not going to follow the Brown Act. Oh, we're going to do it. We're going to do it our way, which you're not going to do that. But if you did, right, then the next step would be that they could file suit and seek injunctive relief to try to block that vote from being considered valid. So they would, in other words, seek to void the board's action and compel you to follow the Brown Act and reconsider the item pursuant to the Brown Act provisions. So we have never, and like I said, I've been doing this almost 20 years. I've never had a client, in response to a notice to cure, say, go pound sand, we're gonna purposefully violate the law. That's just not how people act in a circumstance like that. So in practice, again, even though this stuff, sometimes it seems a lot scarier than it really is, because in practice, the reality is if they send us a letter like this, we're going to call a meeting of the board and we're going to fix it if we think there was some kind of technical error made. So that's what I have for you tonight. Unless there's any other questions, I think oh, Sam, did you have one more?
Sorry, I have one more question, and this is going back to technology and meetings. So I was thinking about technology such as Google Docs, where you can collaborate on documents. So is that something that a best practice would be, that board members don't have collaborative documents where they're sharing information with each other and responding to notes, or using a comment feature in Dropbox, and that we should reserve those discussions for meetings?
Yes, if it involves a majority of the members of the board. Remember, a minority of the members of the board can communicate outside of a noticed meeting. So if it was just two of you collaborating on something, that would not per se be a problem, unless, because there's an exception to that exception, right? Unless the two of you were a designated committee of the board. In which case, if the two of you were a committee and you were talking, you'd form a majority likely of the committee's membership. And so even though it wouldn't be a majority of the board, it might be a majority of the committee. And so watch out for that little trap. But so yeah, in general, what I advise is that people not utilize those kinds of functions and reserve those conversations for a board meeting. Great. Well, Chris, I don't see any other questions, so I'll turn it back to you.
All right. Well, your timing is impeccable. Jerry, we'd like to thank you for sitting in with us for an hour, and we love nothing more than hearing about the Brown Act and all of the intricacies. But no, we really appreciate it. It's important that we know what these things are, and we do our best to follow them to the letter.
All right, sounds good. Well, all of you have a wonderful evening, and it was a pleasure.
If you would mind stopping sharing.
Yep.
Then I am going to.
Quick question. Do we have your presentation?
It was emailed to Chris in advance. Yeah.
It's in the Dropbox. Okay, I put it in there.
Okay, perfect. Because we also need it for oversight and all sorts of things. Thank you very much.
You bet. Absolutely. You all take care. Bye-bye.
All right. Give me just a second to put a few things into the right spot. Does everyone want to take just a 2-minute break before we
That's
launch
great.
into the meeting?
Why don't we do that? Let's take a 2-minute break.
We'll reconvene at 6:05. Okay. And Casey, do we have anyone else in the public, or is everyone in? Okay, it's
Where are you, Yazir? Was the whiteboard there in the back?
Oh, I'm in an office. I don't want to talk about it.
Okay. It's not the usual, the usual, other, scenery we see over the last couple of years.
I know, right?
Yeah.
I don't want to talk about it.
Okay.
okay. We are at 6:06, so let's go ahead and I'm going to share screen. Casey, we don't have anyone in from the public. Okay.
She still has to read that thing, right?
Yeah, if we could.
Go ahead, Casey.
All right. Sorry, my screen's a little small. So the public may comment on any item that is on the agenda or any other item that is in the board's jurisdiction. Members of the public who wish to comment during the board meeting may use the raise hand tool on the Zoom platform. Individual comments will be limited to 3 minutes, and the total time for this purpose shall not exceed 30 minutes per meeting. If an interpreter is needed for comments, they will be translated to English and the time limit shall be 6 minutes. Individuals may speak 1 time per subject. The Board of Trustees reserves the right to mute or remove a member of the public if comments or actions disrupt the board meeting. Board members are prohibited from responding to or commenting on matters raised by the public that are not on the agenda.
Thank you, Casey. Moving on to consent, I'd like to make a motion to approve the regular board meeting minutes of September 20th. All in favor, Frank,
Aye.
Sam?
Yes.
Katrin?
Yes.
All right, Chris, ED report, it's all you.
Okay. All right, let's go ahead and get started. Just a quick few notes about reopening. We are still in the process of reestablishing norms and patterns. This is the thing that has, I mean, it shouldn't have surprised us, but it still has surprised us with how long it is taking to just establish normalcy on campus, as much normalcy as there exists when everyone's wearing masks and we're doing all the things that we're doing differently. But it is now starting to happen. There are patterns that are emerging. Kids are starting to remember how school works. And so that is occurring. We also are happy to report that we have had no positive COVID-19 test results since August. It's been week after week. We still hold our breath all day and night after we test on Tuesdays and Wednesdays, and we get our results usually on Wednesdays and Thursdays. And so all that time we are checking and monitoring and kind of holding our breath. But over the past, it's been at least 6 weeks, we haven't had any positive tests. So that's a very good sign. That is the trend that we're seeing around in Los Angeles. But in LA Unified across, I just heard a statistic today that it's about half and half that have an active case currently, and the other half do not. So thankfully we are in the half that does not, out of all schools. A couple other things, just playground areas and equipment that we are separating and working through by grade level. We were able to purchase some really nice new equipment that we brought on by each grade level. And that is happening each day at recess time and particularly lunch, where kids are able to do lots of different activities. It's a very busy time. They need that break. They need that stretch. And so that has been happening. And the other is that support and intervention for learning loss is underway. So we recognize there is a lot of catching up that needs to happen academically, and so there are pieces that are in place. We'll hit that at the end of this presentation when we talk about our baseline tests for iReady. So that'll be coming up. Pushing forward, our enrollment update. As you recall, we were at last month at 391 students. We are now at 388 students. We dropped a couple, and we are watching this extremely closely. It's very concerning. We are not unique. I mentioned this last month. We are definitely not unique. This is happening all over. And we looked at the reasons why people are telling us they're leaving, and the reasons are because they're moving. In most cases, but nonetheless, it's a trend we have to be watching very closely, because it has an impact on this year and our funding, but it also has impacts on future years. So that will be a piece of what we start planning as we're looking at our Prop 39 application for next year. We'll talk about that in just a moment. And of course, recruitment and brand awareness is an extreme high priority. Just to give you an idea of where our particular numbers are and how they differ from what we projected. No real change from last month. In TKK 1 and 2, those numbers are basically where we thought they'd be at the beginning or in last June. But in grades 3, 4, and 5, in particular, but also in grades 6, 7, and 8, in both of those cohorts of kids, the numbers are less than we had anticipated. There's not one particular area that is where it's way down lower, and our goal is going to be to infill this throughout the year and as we move forward. This does have a big effect on our Prop 39 plans and our facilities update. And so just so the board is aware, we are looking for a submission. Our application goes in on November 1st. We have already been working with our legal team on this. Biggie and I have been running the numbers on it, and we are basically looking at basing our request on past non-pandemic enrollment, which is much more indicative of where we think we will be and plan to be next year. So in other words, because we have a pandemic related dip this year, we are not going to assume that that is what we should be doing next year. We are going to assume a much more robust expectation, and we will present reasoning as to why we think that, and we're going to show past history of consistent numbers that bear that out. Could it be challenged? Yes, and we are going to vigorously defend that challenge if it comes. So just know that that's on our agenda. If you recall, our November 1st application was similarly challenged last year, but after we gave a response to that, that challenge was dropped. I mentioned last
Question
month.
now or later?
Sure, I can entertain question.
So this, going back to like, who came up with the, I mean, I'm just asking it flat out and very unfiltered, who came up with the idea to go back to just the non-pandemic enrollment? Where is that idea coming from?
Both from legal and from us as well. We worked on that together.
And
I'm talking about Biggie and myself.
Yeah, there's no precedent of that, right?
Oh yeah.
I mean, prior
not
years,
here, not in art, but in there from legal's perspective, there's a very, very, very strong argument.
Okay, thank you.
One of the issues we're facing is our number of in-district enrollment is lower than it had been typically, and this is exacerbated by the drop in enrollment. It's also just where people seem to be drawing from. So we've typically been between 70 and 80, but more on the 75 to 80 range. And so 70% is a low number for in-district enrollment out of our overall enrollment. If you recall, John Kim of Stifel, we met with, or he came and spoke at the board retreat. And I told him I wanted to have a follow-up meeting with him, which I did. And he was equally adamant that we are not currently viable for a major facilities loan where we stand right now with our enrollment as it stands right now, and our finances where they stand right now. He recognized that our finances have improved greatly, but he's still looking to what our private, those wishing to make private loans, what are they looking for? And they're looking for a ledger sheet that is showing a positive every year, or an average of positive over multiple years. I said, well, where's our next steps? Where do we need to go? And he said, the next step is to plan for enrollment of a ramp up, and looking at our charter maximum. That number is 775, which figuring out how do we get enrollment up to that level, which we are legally entitled to do. And so that will be presented to the board, a ramp up that we think would be reasonable but aggressive. And that'll be coming in November. So I'll share that in November with the board. He also suggested we do explore lease options if they can exist. They are extremely expensive at market rate. But for a smaller amount of the school, a sub amount of the school, possibly the middle school or possibly TKK, as on a separate campus, as a way to be able to continue building enrollment while we're in this process of ramping up. So I heard from Frank. Now might be a good time if there were any questions from anyone else.
Sam?
Thanks, Chris. So 2 questions. First, is there a plan of how you're addressing the in-district enrollment in the application, or is that something that you need to address? And then the second question.
Let me hit that one first. What we're looking to see is if there's a possibility of adjusting the way we do the lottery. Apparently in the early years of the school, there was a lottery done first for in district, and then a secondary lottery done for not in district. For however that changed, it changed at the time our charter was renewed. And when it was renewed, it's under our current system where we don't have that separate time. We would like to explore if we can go back to that. We don't know whether the political climate will allow us to do that. It might have to wait until we are renewing, but that's not till 2025 now. It used to be 2023. So I think that if we're able to do a very limited type of material revision where it's not across the entire program, but one little small piece, that might get through politically. And you had another question.
Yeah, my second question is on the plan for enrollment ramp up. Is that also going to be tethered to the strategic plan work?
Yes, that's all tied in together. And so is the discussion of the material revision. That was one of the concepts that came out of the group that was advising me. It's all been part of the conversation.
Katrin?
Yes, thank you, Yasir. Sorry, I missed the discussion last month around enrollment, etc. But I had some thoughts and comments as I read the meeting minutes. I was wondering, Chris, how are you going to create the plan that you're presenting, as you just said, in our November meeting? Do you feel like you have sufficient support related to marketing, etc. Because I'm thinking that, well, I don't know, is it only you trying to think about like where to post, what kind of resources, etc., or do you have a committee or volunteers or any kind of additional help at your disposal for that? Because it's a lot to tackle.
It definitely is a lot to tackle. The bulk of it is on the admin team. We don't have a specialized committee just for that. But as we, bring the strategic planning task force to a close, that may be a logical next step. And there are some pieces that I'll be bringing forth with that. So that will also be occurring, by the way, in November. I'll be presenting what I think are recommendations that were guided by the strategic planning task force. But I think that what I'll be presenting in terms of enrollment is more like the roadmap of like what we think the market can bear with an aggressive approach, like trying to push the envelope, but also not being ridiculous. And frankly, there were some projections that were made in years past that were like way beyond what was realistic. And but we'll make this enrollment projection without limitation but we don't have the facility, because it's like chicken or the egg. We can keep saying we don't have the facility, so we can't get enrollment, or we don't have enrollment because we don't have the facility, or it just keeps cycling. So what I want to share then is a multi-year projection, which will also tie into the finance side of it's the solution of where we go for finances, not just for facilities, but also for program, is increased enrollment over time.
Thank you for clarifying.
Frank, anything else? Are you good?
I'm good.
Thank you.
Right.
All right. Well, a little more on the positive side. Wanted to just share a little bit about what's going on with trying to build community in a more virtual, non-on-campus environment for families. And we're starting to make some forays into making this more of a reality. On the virtual side, Fresh Schools, which we implemented last year, probably had, I think it was 50 or 60,000 emails that occurred last year through Fresh Schools. So far, we're now way over that number, in terms of 163,000 emails since the inception of the program. And a lot of those are, 400 at a time out to families. So that tends to rack up, but it also represents communication that's happening from room parents to families. It also represents teachers who are using it this year who didn't really use it last year in the same way. So we completely took an exponential jump in the amount of usage of the Fresh Schools program. So I'm really happy to see that. We also are trying to gear up towards getting our parent volunteers back on campus. We're not there yet, but we are in November going to have some special events that take place outside, that we're going to have as our first opportunity to officially have some parent volunteers at some of these special events. And to make that happen, the volunteer training has started. Casey was making a presentation last week, had a good turnout of, I think there were 30 people at the first one, and there's another one coming up next week. Is that accurate?
Yeah, actually, yeah, next Wednesday.
Wonderful. And we are requiring that volunteers must have a recent COVID test, and volunteers must have a COVID-19 vaccination. So those are requirements for being part of it, as well as the things we've always done, which is TB, Department of Justice, and doing the training, all the different pieces that we've done over the years. So we're excited about that, because then we do have some new events that are that we're setting up. One is happening this Sunday. We're doing it off campus. And so this will be what we're calling a Family Fun Day, and we're meeting at Burton Chase Park, which is at the tip of the marina. Straight down, as you keep straight down Mindanao, you get to Burton Chase Park. It's beautiful, right at the marina where the boats are, and it's just it's wonderful. We're going to have a nice, safe event, and we have I think it's over 200 folks are already signed up for that. So we're excited to add that to our opportunities for families. We are going to be doing a garden beautification day. We think that's going to be the first week of November. It hasn't been finalized, approved, but what's very interesting about the garden beautification is we are doing this, get this, jointly with Marina Del Rey Middle School, and I'm very excited about that. Mr. George, who is one of the, he's kind of a teacher, quasi an administrator there, and he's really connected and tied into the garden. And we've been talking about we got to reclaim the garden, and let's do it together. And so I'm really excited about this. I hope it all the ducks fall in a row to be able to do that on campus on a Saturday. We also are planning for Lantern Fest, which is something we do every year. Last year we did it completely virtually. If you recall, we had people do neighborhood walks in their own neighborhood, which had some positives to it, because people were out there and walking around and talking to people, and so that was kind of cool. But what we missed was the communal aspect of bringing everybody together. So we are planning for a Lantern Fest that is going to be not on campus, but it's going to be around campus. So we are going to not be inside the gates. We're going to be using the sidewalks around the school and doing our walk that way. We're planning to organize in the staff parking lot, and with everyone starting there, and then doing our walk around the entire campus. So that's a new way of approaching it, and we're excited about that. Jogathon is coming up in November, and this one we are going to do on campus, because this is students who are already on campus, and that's how we've done Jogathon in the past. So we will be continuing with that, and we are going to have some volunteers that are the parent volunteers that are helping for that, who have done their training and all of the check boxes checked. We also are going to, parents who just want to observe and watch and cheer people on are going to be able to, we're going to run it alongside the fence on Milton. So that whole area, similar to how we did the kickball game that we did with 5th grade at the end of last year, we're going to do a similar thing with the Jogathon. So excited about that. And then finally, we've been running a Lost and Found every Friday, which gives a chance for people to connect and mingle and get lost items. And we're going to include campus cleanup, which we used to do in years past on Fridays as well. So that's going to be an ongoing event. So we're going to continue to build community as we move forward. Also want to give a quick update on fundraising, and actually I'm going to hand this over to Biggie. Biggie has been our key point person on the internal activities of fundraising. So the annual giving campaign, as well as a few others she's going to tell you about and share how things are going. So Biggie, can I hand it over to you?
Sure, sure. This is the old slide still, Chris. So the annual giving campaign as of today has $125,000 in. That means that is the money that has been actually received, not pledged. So it's more than 50 or 60% to our goal of 200,000. The annual giving campaign is supposed to go through the end of October, and we will ramp up the communication about it now for the last 2 weeks, which means we will include the room parents to reach out to their classes, and we will also do postings through our GIGS communications. There are a few other ongoing events, as Chris put here, the Eat and Shop for Goethe, which are events that happen usually throughout each month. And Eat for Goethe, we have one next week, the whole week, where we do the Battle of the Schools at Sharkies. That's an event where we can earn up to almost $2,000. The 1 year that we won the event, we got that. So the further you get into the battle or in the battle, you get more money from Sharkies back for the people who eat there. It's always 1 week and you fight against another school. So who eats more and who spends more at Sharkies gets to the next round. And in the meantime, there are, I think, 8 or 10 schools participating. When we did it the first time, it was only 4 schools. So he has really built this as a nice fundraiser for schools, but also as a nice thing to increase people eating at his restaurant. And then, as Chris said, the Jogathon is coming up. This is happening on November 16th. This is the typical day that we've used for the Jogathon, not last year, but many years before. It's the Tuesday before Thanksgiving break, because that gives people the opportunity to also still collect money from family members that they see through Thanksgiving break. We've had very good experiences with that timing for the Jogathon. It's not too hot anymore, but it's also not yet the rainy season in November, so that works out really well. And then I had given a class participation chart for the pledge drive. So you can see that there are classes who have higher participation than others. Typically, middle school is lower compared to the elementary school grades. The 4A needs a little push here. And then we'll see how we can get up. We have some incentives that would be given to classes that earn or that receive a participation rate of 90% or higher. There were a couple of years in probably 5-6 years ago, where as a school we received or we reached 90% participation rate, but those were very few years. So we're trying to get back to that point. At this point, for the $125,000 that we've raised so far, those come only from 30% of our family member or families. So there is still a lot of room to go in these last 2 weeks of the pledge drive. Also, a lot of parents have set up recurring payment plans, which is an interesting way of doing it. So at this point, the money that we've received is only counted for the money actually received, but the pledges are higher, which means that money will come in through the rest of the school year. Any questions? I'm happy to answer.
Does 4A have a
Oh, sorry.
like, why is that so such a deficit?
Sorry, what?
The class participation for 4A, why is there such a deficit, like significant outlier? Is there-
The demographics of the class 4A might be a reason for it. It might be that it's just a matter of not pushing it enough yet. So we'll have to work on that.
I'm just pointing that out because obviously a big part of our fundraising is through the parent reps in each classroom. So that's if that starts trending, then okay. I'm sorry, Frank. Anything? Any questions?
My usual question, Biggie, a pledge so far are when compared to received because of the installment plan
Pledged so
versus
far.
budget. Yeah.
Yeah, pledged, we don't have too much more than received, only about 10,000 more. However, as I said, these are mostly people who have set up recurring payment plans. There are still a lot of people who haven't yet said anything because we've realized that once people start donating, they don't fill out the pledge form anymore. So it's very hard to get people to actually fill out a pledge form and tell us in advance what they are doing. So it's almost an outdated way of looking at it because people don't fill out the pledge form.
Right. So, but just remind me, I think the budget for this was $200,000 or 150.
Our goal would be 200,000.
Yeah,
Yes.
yeah. Okay, but it's in striking distance. I mean, we usually have like these things, and we have like if we get up the participation rate to overall maybe by another 10%, and the average spend is, we're getting closer probably.
It's absolutely doable, and as I said, there are still amounts coming in later on. So even if by the end of October it doesn't get to the full 200,000, that doesn't mean that we won't get there. But these last 2 weeks, we now have to push harder.
Yeah. Okay. Thank you.
Sam?
So are there places where either the parent reps or the board as a whole can help and support in encouraging more donations? I know that there's activity through each of the room parents, and I understand that'll be ramping up, but is there a place for the board to help and help make pitches on this?
That's a very good question. We've never had the board involved in making pitches for the pledge drive. It certainly can't hurt if there was a little blurb or something that we could send out with our Tuesday briefing, or that we could send out in the way of addressing people in order to increase participation. We've done in previous years like little testimonials that we send out, why people donate, what their personal motivation is. That usually motivates people. I don't think it's necessarily important that it's a board member who does it, but it doesn't hurt also. So I will definitely reach out to people to ask for such testimonials. And if you're willing to write one, that would be great.
Maybe a different idea would also be giving concrete things, concrete examples on what you are planning to spend the money from the drive. I think that it is always great knowing that you are contributing towards something that you think is going to be really helpful and improve your child's experience at Goethe. And that may motivate those who have not yet participated.
Also a good point. However, with the pledge drive, in theory, we're just trying to make up for the funding gap, that we get less funding than other public schools. So it's really used to to break even in the operating budget. It's not used for something really cool or special that people would donate money for. That is what we do when we do the gala. We've always had a part live ask within the gala, and that was meant for a specific reason, and people were very excited about it and would donate to this. The pledge drive is usually just to finance all our programs, all our staff, all what we need to pay for with the general budget. But maybe we can find something that we would be able to put a little bit more in the center of attention, because obviously IB is an expensive program. Dual language immersion is more expensive than a regular school. So we could put that into some reasoning, but it's not that they buy something very specific with this money.
Katrin and Sam, this is the historical, discussion that's been in this organization, which is, there is a significant funding gap between that we fundraise for in order to keep the quality of education the way it is. Like when I first came on the board, I was like, why not have a goal for like this or the library or 35 field trips this year or something like that. And I'm on my high horse right now, and I'm gonna say it again. I think perhaps, Vicki, as you kind of taken the leadership role of fundraising, it may make sense to break down goals for fundraising into chunks, like, I don't know, field trips. Like we're trying to get 20 field trips this year. We're up to 10 right now because of everything that you're doing. And then have another cycle of, we're trying to get, pay for 2 more electives in junior high, you know what I mean? Like, and we're $15,000 or $20,000. I think just asking parents for a blanket pledge, though it's institutionally, correct. You guys have done it that way. But just like everything else, I think there's an apathy that sets in, and the only people that will contribute are, like people like Frank or just automatically like send it in because their kids go there. So I don't know, Sam and Katrin, what do you guys think?
I think that would be helpful, especially for newer parents like myself, our family. We have not, of course, seen many rounds of this, right? And to me, it was always more that I thought it was for extra things, right? And not so much to fund an existing gap, perhaps also maybe increasing awareness, especially in newer families who started during the pandemic, who haven't really experienced the normal day-to-day annual routine of these drives and pledges that much. It would be helpful to understand that it is very necessary, and not just for perks, but for the bare minimum, actually. So that would help too. But I like Yasir's idea to break it down. I think it's always great, again, contributing towards something very tangible.
Sam?
I agree that it helps to frame it and to make sure that we're contributing, as Katrin said, towards something tangible. I want to make sure that we're not hampering administration and their ability to allocate the funds as needed by saying that they're going to be used for specific activities. So I think there's probably a middle ground, but at least from the just thinking from the parent perspective, I haven't necessarily paid a lot of attention to the messaging around this year's pledge drive, because this is, the 3rd year we've been through it. I saw my form, I put it in, I took advantage of being able to do a monthly installment. And so I haven't admittedly paid a lot of attention to the messaging around it, but if we're having problems with participation, I think, changing the messaging might be helpful.
So Chris and Biggie, could we see something like that possibly at the next meeting, just a new way to to fundraise and not just, you know what I'm, you guys know what we're talking about?
I know exactly what you're talking about. It's just very difficult, because if you tell people you're donating to something specific and then you're not buying the specific, or you're not doing what you're saying you would be doing, then that is not very motivating for the next year. And it's just that simple, that our school has a funding gap that needs to be closed. And that's what the pledge drive has been for the last 13 years. And other fundraising activities were for specific things that were somewhat the perks. But the perk in the mind of the parents that our school gives should be that they get dual language immersion. The perk should be that they get an IB program and all that. And it just needs to be, made more clear that this is money that we really need to break even in our budget.
And we can add a few specifics of in some of the messaging that we're doing in the final push. We can add a little bit more detail about specific programs, whether it's IB or whether it's our specials programs, or the things that we've mentioned already in some of the language, but we can more highlight that.
Right.
But I think, overall, we're in a good, I think we're in a pretty good spot of being able to get close to our mark. So we just need to put the throttle down.
All right, thank you. Is there anything further, Frank and Catherine or Sam?
No, I think, I had more comments, but let's move on for the sake of it's already 7 o'clock.
All right, the iReady baseline data, Chris?
Sure, and I'm going to, let's see.
So guys, I'm just gonna drop off the Zoom. I'm gonna take this on my phone. I gotta get in my car. So Frank, if you can run, if I drop off.
I will steer until you return.
Great. All right, guys, I'm on the other line, but I can hear.
Okay, I'm going to let Scott and Casey give us the update. You saw last month about how things were going between mid-year and the end of the year on the iReady tests. And now we're going to let you see where we stand at the beginning of this year. And then we'll be doing a mid-year test or in December, and then an end of the year test as well. And we'll be showing those benchmarks as we go along. And I'll push forward on the slides. So just let me know when you want to move forward.
All right, Casey, feel free to jump in whenever. So as Chris said, these are the beginning of the year iReady scores. This is our baseline data that we began the second to third week of school. So these are where our students are coming into the school year. Our participation rate was wonderful. We had 100% of our students complete the reading, and only one student who is currently enrolled that did not take the baseline assessment for math. So some things to remember as we go through the data. Students are assessed based on their current grade level Common Core standards. So a third grader is tested on third grade standards, which means that at the beginning of the school year, when the diagnostic exams were administered, these are content area knowledge and skills that students have not yet been taught. Another thing to remember is that our kindergarten students cannot be in that tier 3 or 2 or more grade levels below standard because there are no standards below kindergarten. And then another thing to keep in mind is that our students are coming out of distance learning for the past 1.5 years. Some of them didn't return for hybrid. And as we're seeing across the state of California and across the country, there is some learning loss coming out of that distance learning time.
my connection, or is it is it everybody who's hearing the like? the little
Scott,
bit
you were dropping a little in and out.
Oh, can you hear
You're
me
fine
now?
right now, but
Yeah,
I think it's a
don't,
microphone issue, Scott.
yeah. It's like my old computer.
That's weird. I haven't changed anything.
There's budget in for a new computer for him. There's a budget for get him a new computer.
That's what the fundraising's for. Let me know if I'm cutting out again and I'll try.
You're good right now.
So these are our school-wide math scores and grades kinder through 8. As you can see, we have 20% of our students, which is a little higher than we would usually see in a normal school year, in the 2 grade levels below, so that tier 3 are at risk. 51% of our students tested about a grade level below, and then 29% on standard. And again, these are standards that they have not yet been taught.
So where they'll be at the end of the year, it's bringing them to that point.
Mhm.
Okay.
And you can see our scores by grade level. Again, kindergarten cannot be in the red tier since there are no standards below kinder. And we see most of our learning loss here happening starting at the upper elementary level. As Pete has said over and over again, it is normal. And this is our first administration of iReady to begin a school year. So we don't have really any comparable data points. But as Pete has reminded us, at the beginning of the school year, we would expect students to test lower than the second and third administrations.
Oops.
Just kind of like let you take a look at our student group data. As you can see, our English learners are performing a little bit lower than our native English speakers. And our special education students are performing lower as well. And as you'll see in a later slide, we've put in supports to help those student groups. Same with our different subgroups here. You can take a look at how they performed. And then the other big gap we see here is in our.
Did everybody, like, I'm sorry, did everybody have enough time to look at all the slides? If like you're going very fast. I mean, I've looked at it. Just want to make sure.
Maybe I would like to take another look at the previous one. Thank you.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's some significant differences there.
Mhm.
Okay to move forward.
And again, these are typical trends that I've seen over the last 16 years in terms of achievement gaps. And we'll go through some steps that we're taking as a school to help to close that achievement gap.
Okay, I'm gonna move us forward to English or reading scores.
So our reading scores school-wide are significantly better than our math scores, which again is typical. Math is usually a little bit lower. We have 16% of our students 2 grade levels or more below, about 40% a grade level below, and then 44% of our students on grade level for those standards which they have not yet been taught. And if you look at the domains, again, typical, the comprehension of informational text is always higher level thinking and a little bit more challenging. And then those 3 at the top, phonological awareness, phonics, and high frequency words, students should master by the time they're in 2nd or 3rd grade. We're seeing the same trends by grade level here. So by the time students are in upper elementary, we're seeing a little bit more of a learning loss.
You're dropping off again, Scott.
So in our upper elementary, we're again seeing a little bit more learning loss coming out of distance learning. Again, our student group data,
Chris, could we have you like take over? Is that possible?
I have an idea. Sometimes it helps if you call in from a mobile phone and you use the phone like a microphone. Or a headset.
Catherine, that's genius. That's really good.
Yeah, that's always our kind of our last
Let's see
resort.
if the
At work.
Can you, is this better?
That's
much.
Much better.
Oh, so it's a microphone issue.
Yep.
All right. Interestingly, I'm not used to talking with these on. Interestingly, our English learners performed significantly better on the reading assessment than they did the math, which is in English, although math does include a lot of reading these days. And again, our special education students are showing that they need a lot of support. And for our race and ethnicity, again, seeing a lot of the same trends in terms of student groups that need the support. So it is apples to oranges. The end of year assessment in May is where students performed at the end of the school year, which we would hope and expect to be significantly higher than our baseline data at the beginning of the school year. But just for a comparison, on the right-hand side, you can see where we were at the end of the school year last year. And then those same graphs we went over for, or charts for reading and math to begin this school year. So the goal is by the end of this school year that we'll see very similar data to what we saw in May 2021.
I feel like I've asked this question before, but maybe it was at a town hall. If I did, sorry, but is there a way to see progress metrics to somehow structure the data by the individual and just have aggregated data on progress?
So individual students, parents, and teachers can see that progress.
But then aggregate it somehow to visualize learning overall.
I think from the aggregated point, what we would want to be seeing is the pyramid on the left turning to look like the pyramid on the right. That's where we want to get to by the end of this year, and maybe even a little better than the pyramid on the right. So I think that's your aggregate score. Whereas breaking down to the individual student, of course, we can't give student information in the aggregate, but that is done, and this is a driving piece of what the teacher does and what the intervention aides and an intervention teacher does, as well as English learner and other supports that are out there.
I think another point, and this is something I don't know, Scott, if iReady already has for us, or if this is something we could ask them if it's possible, because each individual student also has their own goals that are specific to the amount of growth that they should have. So whether or not they make it into a different tier, they have their own growth goals to meet. And so I think an interesting point to look at that growth is how many of our students met their annual goal or their stretch goal for that school year.
Yeah. The strategic planning committee is making some, is discussing the matter of how to show growth and what is a stretch goal for the overall school in regards to the educational goal of the kids. And Dr. Jones will, once fully authorized, will present some of the ideas regarding the matter. But it was discussed during the strategic, planning, or what is it? What do we call a strategic meeting?
Task force.
Task force, yeah. Does it conclude your presentation, Scott? Oh no, there's more. Okay. Go ahead.
So again, the things to remember at the top, which we already went over, our key takeaways, as you saw, are that we have certain student groups that need extra support, and we've put those supports into place, and then certain grade levels that need extra support. And then last slide are those supports. So our classroom teachers are going to continue to analyze their iReady data and the other data that they collect on a regular basis to help inform those areas of need so that they can tailor instruction. We have our intervention support. So Mr. Gonzalez has been going full force into classrooms, helping those students in the red tier to target their Common Core state standards that they need help with. So has Miss Mateos. She's been going in and helping English learners. And then Miss Bavelis, our intervention teacher, has begun to work with students in small groups and individually to support their needs.
And just to add, sorry, just to add with the intervention position, the way that Scott has structured the schedule for who's getting the support is based on where our highest needs are. So right at the beginning of the year, we saw from the iReady data that our upper elementary and middle school, particularly 6th grade, needed a lot of support. They had the most students in that red tier. So he began with pushing in and supporting those classes with a much heavier focus than our lower grades. And as we go throughout the year, we'll continuously adjust his schedule as well as Miss Mateos for ELD to make sure that we're hitting those students that need the support the most when they need it most.
And then, as Chris mentioned, our next administration will be in December. And I'll close with just a little anecdote. I stopped by the 8th grade advisory class today, and they all had their printouts that the Miss Pham, their teacher, had given them. And they were looking at their reading scores and their math scores. Some were proud. Some mentioned to me that they rushed through the assessment. So I do think there were a lot of students who weren't quite sure what this assessment was going to be, since it was the baseline in the beginning of the school year. And I am expecting, with the supports we put in place and with students being informed by their teachers of their stretch goals, of their initial scores, some higher scores come December.
Excellent. Excellent report. Thank you. With that, I'm going to do a round of questions. Katrin, any more questions?
It would be interesting to see at a later point, maybe putting it on the agenda for a later point in time, what exactly our plans are to address the learning gap, specifically as you outlined, Scott, regarding ethnicity, socioeconomic background. How do we become more equitable in how we support our students? Just seeing those plans approaches would be very helpful.
Yeah.
Thank you, Katrin. Sam, any additional comments?
No, I really echo Katrin's comment, though. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Yazir, now you're in the car, you've heard the presentation. Any additional comments or questions?
No, I'm good. Thank you, Frank.
Thank you, Scott and Casey. And then Dr. Jones, back to you to the agenda.
Okay. There's the agenda. Hold on 1 second. Okay, we are now on to the Finance Committee report. And Ryan, I think you have joined us.
I'm here, so let me go to item B1, approval of financials for September 2021, 10 minutes. Chris Jones, Ryan, and Frank. Do I have a motion to move forward with the agenda? Who moves? I move. Do I have a second?
I'll second.
I'll second.
Yeah, Yazir seconds. Dr. Jones, your floor.
All right, I'm trying to pull up. Oh, great.
By the way, that happened to me too on the when I try to read it at the.
I'm gonna go back one. Let me try one
Maybe
more
Ryan
time.
can bring it up, if that doesn't work.
Ryan, would you be able to do that for us?
Sure, if you let me.
I will
share
stop
my screen.
sharing.
All right, can everyone see my screen?
Yes.
Okay, in front of us, we have the September dashboard. And I just wanted to start with an update on enrollment and ADA. So for this presentation, we have enrollment data through the end of month 2. As of month 2, we had 388 students, and we had an average daily attendance percentage of about 95.8%. Okay, so the enrollment number is about 4 less than what we have in our forecast. However, because the average daily attendance is slightly higher than the 95% in our forecast, we actually have an average ADA of about what the forecast is showing. Nevertheless, don't forget, we did have to lower our total enrollment down by 32 students. But I did want to just say that, we're about 36 under budget as of month 2. However, our forecasted for 392 at 95%, it's still holding true unless there's new data that suggests we should adjust enrollment going forward.
If I could chime in a little bit on that, we have been working, and this last week working extremely hard because there was a October 15th deadline with regard to independent study, and we have been able to recapture quite a bit of our independent study, which is why this number is above 95%. And we still think there's a little bit more that we'll end up being able to come through with a few students who are still on out and have not come back in yet from an independent study. What we don't know yet is what attendance is going to look like during the winter months, when we typically have lower attendance, but we do feel like we have a handle on independent study now, which is a big shift from where we were even a few weeks ago. So I think we keep our number at 95%, which is what we budgeted, and we hopefully are going to come in above 95% as we continue on through this year, and we are at that point right now.
Excellent. Please move the meeting along, Ryan.
All right. Thank you, Frank. Moving along, I will go over the key variances on our income statement. So total revenue, our big variances here, same report as the last meeting. For the most part, it's 274,000 lower. That's our impact for having 32 less students. Our LCFF funding is down because of that. The federal revenue, $41,000 less in the federal revenue, has to do with timing of our stimulus funding that we had planned for in the budget. That could also change as of tonight if we, depending on the ESSER 3 plan that's being board approved. So really for federal and state revenue for this year, there's a lot of timing variances that are possible due to when we put into action our stimulus funds. As of right now, we're deviating about $40,000 almost in federal funding. On the expense side, we are trending lower in our certificated salaries, as well as in our health benefits. I believe, Dr. Jones, do we still have open positions?
We have one kindergarten aide that we're trying to get filled. at the moment.
But that's a classified position, right?
Correct.
So the certificated salaries, they're lower solely due to salaries coming in lower than budget for new staff, or
Yeah.
yeah. Okay. And I did want to point out the big variance as it relates to staffing has to do with employee benefits. It looks as though we're trending about 69,000 under budget here for the year. That has to do with the majority's health and welfare, but there's a large portion that was a favorable surprise regarding the state unemployment insurance rate. We had a higher rate assumed in our budget, and good for us and for all schools. That rate was dropped to start this fiscal year in the governor's budget. Our net income projected as of the month of September is $8,000 at year end, which is about 40,000 lower than our board approved amount.
But still a break-even budget at this point.
Still a break-even budget, and it seems as though we could still be, very prone to swings as new funding comes about. Dr. Jones, I sent you an email the weekend about more funding that's available for your school now through an additional education, expanded learning opportunities grant?
Yes, another ELO grant.
Confused with the one that you received last year.
Right.
They just recycled the acronym. So yeah, so there's it's a stimulus year. There could be a lot of variances due to the timing of when plans are enacted. But all in all, for this year, at the moment, we're forecasting positive net income of $8,000.
Okay.
Our ending cash at the end of September was.
Let's stop here. Before we go into cash flow and any statement of that nature.
Sure.
I'm just gonna ask a couple Katrin, any questions at that stage?
Not yet. Thank you, Frank.
Sam?
Not yet, thanks.
Okay. Yazir? We lost him, or he can't find his unmute button. So Ryan, please continue.
I actually think we might have lost him.
Okay, well, he's going to come in.
Right? Okay. So hearing no questions, our cash balance at the end of September 30th, and I just wanted to take a little bit of time on the balance sheet. We ended the month of September with 1.4 million in the bank. And I just wanted to highlight, because last presentation, we had a receivable of about $471,000 from prior year money. That's actually been not received in full, but a large portion during the month of September. We now only have $107,000 left outstanding of money that we earned last fiscal year, and we're still waiting to be paid. The majority of this comes from Title I and from our lottery apportionments from the prior year. We are forecasting year-end cash of 1 million, almost 1.1 million, with another large receivable at year-end of $868,000.
Why is that receivable so large? We don't have deferrals.
No, but I mean that's our best guess at the moment for the AR.
Okay, another round of question. Any comments regarding the balance, regarding the cash flow statement and the balance sheet? Katrin? Sam?
No.
Okay. Shall we go on? Shall we continue with the chat? Oh, Yazir, is he back? Not back yet?
Not yet. I don't see him.
Okay, then we need to review the check register.
Sure. The last pages are the check register of our packet, and this was reviewed line by line at the Finance Committee meeting. But as good stewards of public funds, it's important that the entire board have an opportunity to review and ask questions.
Let's give it a minute to review. one pager, and then I'm going to ask Katrin and then Sam again. Katrin?
Looks good. No questions.
Thank you. Sam?
Thanks. And it might be more of a question to you, Frank. At the Finance Committee, do you go into detail of each of these in the event that there's questions, raise questions there, and has this been considered by the Finance Committee?
Well, as a chair, the majority of the of the things they come up for approval. So I see like every approval over I need to approve every payment over $5,000. And so for me personally, there are no surprises in general, but we are reviewing we're going through the same process here. And then we spend, if anybody comes up with any questions, we're spending a little bit more time and going a little deeper. But the process is the same, Sam.
Got it. Thank you. So if we look at the line at the California Credit Union for credit card purchases, when you're looking at that at the Finance Committee or however that's presented, is there more backup to provide you with information about what that is? Or
in regards to this one, the answer is no. We have not reviewed the individual credit card. We have not reviewed the individual statements of the credit card.
Just to give you a little more detail on that, the credit card is new for us, so we're getting our systems in place. But in order to approve it through SpendBridge, we have it looked at. It's a purchase that either I have made on behalf of the school, or I've given okay for Biggie to make on behalf of the school. We check and cross-check and have to have the support materials into SpendBridge for anything we use the credit card for. Most typically, we use it for things that have to be done online, where we have to purchase something that there's no other way to do it. Or an example of something that was purchased when we are doing our event that's at Burton Chase Park. We spent $380, I think it was, that was on the rental of the area so that we'd have that area to set up in. And I used the credit card for that.
Great. Thanks, Chris. You captured what I was trying to ask, which is, that's where the control is over that part.
Yes.
So there are financial controls about that. Great.
Yeah.
Thank you.
So every item in the system, and we should actually do a presentation. Every item in the SpendBridge, goes into, the invoice is Biggie submits it. Dr. Jones signs off on it. If it's beyond his threshold, which is 5,000, I sign off on it. The credit card was actually used in order to avoid all these to pay people back, they have used their own credit card, etc. So, but these items will be checked, and I think it's a very good point you're making here, Sam, right? I think we need to just have review it, in an internal audit, maybe the credit card statements. And that's a good point you're making there. I appreciate that.
Sam, I love that question, just so you know. And the reason why is because I scrutinize the credit card very carefully, and Dr. Jones can tell you that. And the reason why I was impressed that you called it out is because out of every single item on this check register, that's the one thing that could be anything, right? It just says credit card purchases. What is that, right? Who looked at it to make sure that it was an appropriate expense for a school? So that's a great observation. I actually pulled it up in front of me at the moment. It's just a bunch of various things like classroom materials, office supplies, registration for a a professional development opportunity with Young, Mini, and Core, a legal firm. But you don't want to see like, excessive usage of this credit card. What Frank described, the need at this school is to make it so that staff doesn't have to come out of their own pockets with a credit card payment when a credit card is necessary and us having to reimburse them. Yeah, they can do it, but the organization didn't want to have to, always rely on the credit of staff. But great question, Sam.
Yeah, another example of things where we need to buy something quickly, where we were working through some lunch issues, and we needed to make sure a student or a couple of students were fed, and we went to the store and got food. So that kind of thing, and I'll use the credit card for that type of thing.
I have another more general question, actually. How frequently are we as the board overall going to review finances? Is that a monthly or more quarterly? Monthly?
So the monthly financial statements our basic look, and at this time of the year, we're far away from June 30th, so they're not as accurate at this time of the year as they will be 2 months from now or 4 months from now. The closer we get to the end of the year, the more accurate those forecasts are. But it's important that we're looking at them, so that monthly activity is really important for the board. But the official things that the board does are they will approve the first interim report and the second interim report, and they will approve the final end of year budget, or end of year the close, and so that is what the main things that the board will be doing throughout the year.
Thank you, Chris. I was trying to better understand the level of granularity in which we are going to be involved, because now we're looking at individual transactions, right, as granular as it gets. So
Yeah.
if we need to do that, okay, I would just probably need to see budget versus actuals to be able to truly understand, are we fine? Because if I'm looking at the larger numbers, like for PowerSchool, right, one of our largest purchases here, is that a recurring payment? If so, what's the frequency of those payments? What have we budgeted? So I would need more context to fully weigh in if that's what we want.
Yeah, and that's a perfect one of an example of gee, what was that one about? Okay, that was the approval that was made last month, and we went ahead and did the purchase. It is a one-time startup payment, but there is an ongoing piece of $6,000 that will be an ongoing piece of this, but that amount won't be an ongoing amount.
So was that, if there are any other questions? Katrin, Sam? Nope. Okay. With that, I'm gonna make the roll call. Katrin?
Yes.
Approval of the financials?
Yes.
September financials? Yes. Sam?
Yes.
And it's a yes for me. Item number 2, approval of ESSER 3 expenditure plan, 10 minutes. Dr. Jones, I move. Do I have a second?
Second.
Sam
Sam.
seconds. Sam, Dr. Jones, your floor.
Okay, let me go ahead and share again. Hopefully I'll be able to open it this time. Let's keep our fingers crossed. Okay, the other thing that the Finance Committee did, so we took a look. Yay. We took a look at our.
Can you click outside of the outside of the text to get the way with the highlight? You're highlighting everything here. It appears.
Oh, like that.
Thank you.
Okay. One of the things that is required that we complete is for funding that is provided through ESSER 3. We also have funding that's provided through ESSER 2, but we don't need to provide this plan for it the way we do for ESSER 3. ESSER 3 is federal funding, And when we originally were planning for this funding, we were basing that on the cost or the amount coming in from School Services of California, which estimated we were going to be getting $680,000. This is funding that is coming in for the purpose of giving extra supports to students. And so it was part of the of several over $1 million of funding that came in that we broke out across multiple years. Unfortunately, the ESSER III funding, when it came in, was far below that funding amount that School Services had projected and that we were looking at back in June. So the amount that came in was $256,529. What does that? Why was it such a discrepancy? Well, I checked into it because I was not too pleased, obviously, that the funding, dropped in such a large amount. What we were told is that School Services uses a very involved process of grabbing information from related to Title I and makes assumptions about Title I schools. Those assumptions are based on a higher free and reduced lunch rate than we have. And because we were new, as you recall, into Title I, they had no past experience with our school to be able to do that. So they used just a general number, and that's how they came up with that larger number. So this is in fact the amount of funding that we have. We had plotted out to be doing specialized programs really during last year, during this year, during next year after. This lack of funding is not going to affect us this year. It obviously didn't affect us last year. It's not going to affect us this year. It will affect us some next year. It will definitely affect the final year we were hoping for, which means we'll need to curtail some of these specialized services a year earlier than we might have otherwise. With that being said, this is new money to us. So this is funding that we last February knew nothing about. We were not expecting. So this is new funding, and how we're planning to expend it is listed into kind of these three areas. The largest of which is learning loss, but those are kind of grouped areas. So I'm going to pull down to where we're looking at the different pieces. So we have our we have an instructional aid that is a position that is working to focus on student safety, and that is a part of that's a position currently held by Mr. Alex, and that position is in for next year. That we have other funding that we are looking at, including instructional assistance, that would be, trying to see where it lists it out, where we are funding for instructional aid for I'm trying to confirm which one. Okay. I'm sorry, I thought it was in a different spot. So the instructional aids that we would be funding include, I'm going to show you this in a little easier format that I shared. Where is it? Okay, I'm sorry, I don't have the right thing up, or another thing that would show it. So we would be adding an instructional aid that is we currently have for our English learners, which is done through Title I. We have a instructional aid position that is supporting intervention. We also are looking to support our program of SEL, which would be partially funded here in terms of our SEL consultant, and the funds. We would also use that we use to re-engage students and bringing them back into the excitement of school, which included our program with PS Arts and also our program at middle school with coding with computers. And so those pieces are what we would be looking at supporting. Right. And I'm going to stop there for a moment. I might need to grab another piece. I'm going to stop sharing.
Was that Dr. Jones tried to look for the document, the finance committee when reviewing the shortfall in funding, and the implication on the outgoing years, not so much for this year's. For this year, we we asked that eventually the 3-year budget, the budget projection needs to be revised, surpluses which we were thinking we were going to get in the upcoming years need to be reduced, and take a closer look as we go further through the year, throughout the year, to revise the 3-year budget outlook. I mean, that was one of the tasks we suggested to the administration they do over the course of the year. This year's implications are minor, or not at all. So was that. Sam, any I'm going to do the rounds here, before Dr. Jones is going to share again. Sam, let's start with you. You're in the top corner this time. So
thank you. So with the change from the projected funding, and then understanding that they're basing it off of an estimate, is there any opportunity to ask for recalculation or to appeal the amount as set?
Yeah, that's what I that was my initial thought. And unfortunately, I checked with the CDE, and they confirmed that that is what it is, and that there's not any appeal or challenge to it. So yeah, that was the first direction that I went.
Katrin?
I have no questions.
Okay, thank you. Yazir is still not back. Dr. Jones, do you have the additional document?
Do.
Okay, then.
I'm going to share screen. Okay. So this is a little simpler way of seeing what are the things that we were looking to pay for. In the current year, in 21-22, we are paying for the reduction of class size in our 5th grade acquisition class, which we mentioned earlier in the year, that if we did not bring down the class size in the 5th grade class, and we did not bring down the class size, which we did out of general fund in the 4th grade class, we would have had imbalanced class sizes of one class in the high 30s and another class in the 20s. So we were able to split it between 3 different sections. And so the 5th grade acquisition funding here is in 21-22 and also in 22-23. In the current year, we also are doing the Code Rev funding for the coding class, and that's in 21-22. That's not in the part of the funding in 22-23. But in 22-23, we also have that the IAs for kinder support. We also have the intervention support that I mentioned, the campus safety and SEL monitor, our PS Arts Exploratory, as well as the SEL consultant, which is only a partial amount of that, but at least it gets us starting, leading towards that. So those were the things we're recommending that we move forward with ESSER 3 funding. Unfortunately, where it leaves us out is this 23-24 that we thought we would have these things funded again. The other thing that is missing from this is the intervention teacher we had listed down, as we had hoped that could go on in future years, and that cost would be prohibitive. So we're looking for supporting with the instructional aids that we have listed here, and the other supports that are there is the recommendation.
Thank you. Sam.
No further questions.
Thank you. Katrin?
No further questions either.
And no further questions for me. Will that conclude your presentation, Dr.
Yes.
Jones? Okay. Then I will do the roll call. Approval of ESSER 3 expenditure plan. Sam?
Yes.
Katrin?
Yes.
And it's a yes for me too. That concludes the Finance Committee report, item number B. We're going over to item number C, approval of policy for student vaccination. I move. I need a second.
I can second.
Perfect. The document was provided in the Dropbox. Dr. Jones, your floor again.
Okay, let's do that. All right, in last month, we had an opportunity to approve the vaccination policy related to employees, and that was in connection with the guidance from LAUSD. And this month we have the same kind of guidance, but this is related to students. And so LAUSD is taking a leading role nationally in terms of requirements for vaccinations. But at the same time, this has also been supported at the state level. And that the state, while they're not moving on quite as quick of a timeline as LAUSD, is indicating, the governor has very clearly indicated that this will be the direction that vaccines will be mandated across California. So it won't be district by district, that it will be a requirement that is across the board. And so the policy as written here, I think this is probably the key points of when things are due, and this is why we want to get this approved in October so that we can start pushing out to families and let them know. Who does this affect right now? It is students 12 years of age and older, and so that is our students mostly in 7th or 8th grade, but eventually there will be a few 6th graders and some 6th graders that turn 12. And so you can see there's different rules and timelines depending on when someone turns. But basically, first doses that need to be out by November 21st, 2021, in order to be fully ready and fully vaccinated for the January deadline. So this is the language, as I said, it is completely consistent with what is required by LAUSD of us as a co-located campus. There is not any room for discussion with LAUSD on this. They are making requirements. Now, they may choose to change the requirements, but they're not going to be doing that at our behest. They're going to be they're trying to work through what this means, but this is the policy that they have that we are expected to follow, and unless it changes, this will be what moves forward. So I am recommending to the board that they approve this policy, and that we are moving forward with supporting keeping everybody safe on our campus. I think this is where the game changing happens, is when we have enough students that are fully vaccinated, that's when we're going to start seeing a more of a return to normalcy.
Thank you, Dr. Jones. Sam? Or you wanna, or I can go to Katrin first if you want.
No, it's fine. Thank you. So 2 questions. One, is there any signal from the district as to how soon after there's emergency use authorization for younger students, if they would then bring them into a mandated policy that we'd have to follow?
No, they have not given. I just was on a CCSA conversation where they said they're in a wait and see mode, but everything they've indicated is that they will be moving forward with it. I don't know how quickly that would be. And the other big question is with regard to exemptions and then accommodations, if they will allow an accommodation to be a student maintaining on campus. Keeping in mind, students actually have much more rights in this scenario than, for instance, employees, because students have the right to a free public education in California, and so that becomes kind of at the basis. So I think that there's we're going to be hearing a lot about this, and we will see if there's changes. We'll bring it to you, and if we need to move quickly on something, we might even need to hold a special meeting at some point if things do change. But for right now, this is where things are, and it is moving forward, and we need to be able to let families know.
And you kind of led into my second question, which was regarding exemptions and accommodations. Will you, as the administration, have a level of autonomy, or do you have to check it with the school that we're co-located with, or how do you have a sense of how that will work, or is that also a work in progress?
So it's a great question. I do not think we're going to have much autonomy. We certainly did not have much autonomy or any autonomy with regard to employees in terms of how exemptions or accommodations may be dealt with. We could set up our own accommodations, but that accommodation could not be working on campus in any capacity. So that's what I don't know. Where they're going to be in terms of when things happen in January, and whether exemptions or accommodations will be allowed to actually be on campus as a student. It's unclear.
Katrin?
Yeah, I think Sam kind of asked the questions that I had in the back of my mind too. I think that it'll be really important to have very clear procedures in place. I think the policy is fine. It's fairly straightforward, as a matter of fact, right? But I think the devil is in the details, the what ifs, and having students being able to provide students and families with very, very clear guidelines about these specific cases that will really inevitably pop up.
Yeah.
I have no further questions regarding the matter. So with that, again, the roll call, top to bottom, according to my windows here. Sam, you're first. Oh.
Approve.
Approve. Katrin?
I approve.
Yeah, same for me. Motion carries. Item number D, approval of vendor contract for Panorama Survey Title I. I move. We need a second.
I'll second. This is Sam.
Okay. Yeah, this is Sam. Thank you, Sam. Dr. Jones?
So this is just a really quick item that is part of our Title I, and that we are wanting to really understand what's happening with our stakeholders and be sure that we're getting information from our families and from our students and from our staff. Apologize, this doesn't seem to be loading. But they are basically these are a survey system that is endorsed and will be paid for through Title I funds. There we go.
Please click again outside of the of the document.
Sure.
Thank you.
It's not letting me do it.
No, it's good. Well,
that was okay.
Yeah,
that's better. Okay. So it gives us a system that will allow us to give out surveys and collect surveys and then analyze those surveys. And we've in the past done surveys, but we spend our time trying to figure out getting them out and getting them back, and less time with the analysis piece. And the intent of this is that we are also going to be able to take this raw data and include it into the Unified Insights dashboard that is being currently developed. So this was part of the federal LCAP addendum that the board already approved. And so this is just following through on that and building out the contract from there. So I'm excited about it. I think it's going to give us some good information. And it's funded not through general fund, but funded through Title I specifically, and was recommended by our consultant that that's what we do in terms of get involved with a structured survey program.
Can you scroll down a little bit, Dr. Jones,
Sure.
here? And hold on 1 second. Nope, the other one a little bit up. No, you're going the wrong direction.
Okay.
Thank you.
Okay. So any questions?
Sam?
Yeah.
Katrin?
Yes. I'm sorry. I feel like I'm lacking a bit of context here. So what exactly is the purpose of the survey? So I'm looking at the bullet points right here. Is it more like a student satisfaction and parent and teacher sort of satisfaction / engagement type survey? Do I understand that correctly?
Yes. The surveys themselves are have been developed through the testing and retesting of the surveys themselves, and they're really twofold for us. One is that we are looking to seek information about happiness with the program, safety at school, how you feel about coming to school, and coming both directly from students and also from families, and also drawing from staff. So 3 types of surveys that would be going out that are specific to that way. And then the second area is specific to this first bullet here, which is the social emotional learning measures. So these three are the more general type of stakeholder input and information. Those three bullets, and then the top bullet is specific measures for social emotional learning that we haven't been able to draw on in the past. We think a strong social emotional learning program, but we haven't been able to quantify that, and that's a really important piece of showing how we're making use of Title I funds, and that's why it's drawing from that particular funding source.
Thank you. And how often are you looking to administer this survey?
We're able to do it as much as we want, but there's certainly survey burnout in this world, and so we're thinking twice a year. Once at the beginning, towards the beginning of the year, once right towards the end of the year, and kind of gauging it that way. And then it would also give us time to do the analysis. They typically recommend 2 or 3 times a year, and I think we're going to opt for 2 so that we're not overburdening families and everybody with a survey every week.
Do you, I mean, I recommend bringing up the document, the write-up you have done in regards to the approval for the document, which was in the Dropbox as well, Dr. Jones. I mean, it summarizes this panorama survey for Title I.
Just for you.
So I give it another minute. Okay, Sam. No, this time Katrin is at top of the list here. The windows change. Katrin is first. Any further questions?
No further questions. I'm ready.
Okay. Sam, how about you?
I'm also ready.
Okay, then I'll do the roll call. Katrin?
Yes, I approve.
Sam?
Yes.
And that's a yes for me too. Thank you. Item number 7, calendar topics for upcoming board meetings. Our next board meeting is scheduled to be for the...
I think it's November 15th.
November 15th.
If that's a Monday.
Is that a Monday, the 8th? I don't think so. Yeah, it could be the 13th, yeah. Okay. Anything outside of the scheduled agenda which you would like to bring up to the attention? Katrin, anything?
Well, I brought up this topic of equity earlier as we were reviewing the academic results that Scott presented. I don't know if it's too early, if we need more lead time for that, but that's certainly something I would like to circle back on at a later point in time. And I also have more thoughts on marketing. I am unsure what the most appropriate forum for that is, if that's the board meeting agenda or something else.
Two quick thoughts on that, if we could, for marketing. Would you be able to be open to a conversation and we could get started and kind of see what next steps would be if I could follow up with you on that?
Yeah, totally.
That would be great. And then the first question was
the equity question.
Oh, yeah, if we could circle back on that when we do the presentation of the December results, which would probably be January, and we'll make that a part of that conversation at that time. Does that work for you?
I guess, Chris, what is the conversation? Hey, I'm back.
He's back. He's back. I'm resigning the steering wheel back to you.
Oh, thank you, Frank. Well done, as always. Chris and Katrin, what is the equity conversation? I know we briefly touched on it during our facilities conversation, you know what I mean? But I guess, Katrin, what would you like to see that, like, Chris bring
Yeah, as we reviewed the iReady results today, there were significant discrepancies which were not new, right? As we looked at different groups, racial student groups, as well as socioeconomic different groups. And I was hoping to see some kind of plan how we would like to over time decrease these discrepancies in order to be more equitable.
So Chris, is that something you guys have talked about in the strategic plan? I mean, I know the previous strategic plan had some stuff in it about it and how to tackle it.
It's definitely part of our academic discussion. We talked a lot about that, the gap, and particularly socioeconomic has been one that just stands out. So what I'd like to do for that is really maybe we can drill down a little bit more into some of the student group data, and for one, the comparison between where they are, what you just saw today. I want to see that compared to where things stand from December. I'd also like to compare, and particularly with student groups in mind, comparing from the previous years, although that was a little later in the year. It was a February delivery, so it's not quite apples to apples, but it is a mid-year comparison. So we can look at that and then see, okay, we already said we're doing this, and this in terms of trying to support. Is it working? Is it functioning? And maybe we can just drill down a little bit more on some of those student groups.
I know traditionally that's always been a challenge with every school district, so I look forward to it.
It's interesting. Just today, I went onto this website, greatschools.org, which was one of the major sources of information when we made the decision where to sign up Sawyer. And I saw that they changed their rating system to put more emphasis on equity and on progress measures. And Goethe dropped 2 points in their 1 to 10 rating over the past 2 years, from an 8 to a 6 out of 10. And I think that's very interesting, just to see how I think public awareness on these specific topics is really changing. And especially the emphasis of equity is just absolutely changing. So I think it's worth just, I guess, thinking about our approach. And like you said, Chris, I appreciated that, to think about what are we doing and is it working? So yeah, that kind of stood out to me today.
I also appreciate that you described very, very succinctly exactly what our strategic planning group has been looking at, which is comparison data and great schools. And we did notice that drop, and we did try to find out why. And it's based on the results that came in 2019 on the CASP scores in 2019, and there was a major discrepancy. So what I'm hoping to do is, how do we adjust that? Yeah, that particular one, all we have to go on right now is that 2019 results, but we're going to have new results that are coming in this coming year, and we want to meet those head on.
So we will have that conversation, Chris. Is that December? Is that right?
It'll be in January, because December is when we give the test.
Okay. No, I'm talking about the equity conversation.
Yeah. Yeah, it'll be part of the conversation around the results, the next round of results, which will come in January.
Got it. Okay. All right. Anything further from any other board member? Sam, you got anything else?
Nope.
Frank, you good?
Just a, I will be in Germany on the November 15th that week, and so I will likely not going to be joining. I'm trying to look what that would be. What, 3 o'clock in the morning?
Oh, you can do it, Frank.
Oh, okay. Of course. Yeah. So just as a heads up.
All right. Thank you. All right. Then at this time, we will convene to close session.
Okay.